Hi everybody and welcome to FAQ. Every weekday we have a look at a different part of the Bible to see how it helps us to live well for God in lockdown and beyond. And yesterday we started a series looking at the book of Esther. Now I've got to tell you, I'm a big fan of the book of Esther. I think it's got so much to say to us in this kind of cultural moment as we're figuring out who we're supposed to be as the people of God. I remember going to a meeting in the Houses of Parliament, and it was about how Christians engage in politics. And to be honest, the mood music in the room was Christians are being marginalised, we're being persecuted, we're not being allowed to do what we used to do. And it was definitely a glasses half empty narrative. And I just felt the complete opposite. I didn't expect Christians to have power in our government. I didn't expect us to be able to command and control how things operate. I always understood that we were going to be a mustard seed. We were going to be leaven in the dough. We were going to be light in the darkness. And we didn't expect to run everything, but we did expect to influence it. And for me, the book of Esther gives us a model of how to live and how to lead when you're not in control. When you recognize that positional power, that Christians being in charge of everything isn't our goal, but blessing those around us, seeking justice, standing up for the oppressed and the minorities and the marginalised. That is our role, and it always has been. And us being in power is a complete oddity. So with that in mind, I hope this little series encourages you, because for so many people, they're on the back foot, they're on the defensive. They just remember what we used to have. It's a nostalgia mindset, and what we need is a future mindset. And now more than ever, I think we need that, where many people are longing for what was before lockdown, when life was normal. But I know some of our politicians have been talking about a new normal. I don't know if I like that language, but we do need a fresh vision for the future. And I want it to be informed by the Bible, and it doesn't have to involve us running everything, but it does have to involve us blessing other people. So with that in mind, let's dig into Esther chapter 2. Later, when the anger of King Xerxes had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed about her. If you remember yesterday, we looked at the most powerful man in the world being upstaged by his more powerful wife, and how that kind of blows up his mind, causes him all sorts of internal conflict. And again, we see the Bible undermining patriarchy, because actually it's the women that are in control of this story. So, well, God's in control, but the women are the lead characters, and that's why this book is called the Book of Esther. Then the king's personal attendants proposed, let a search be made for beautiful young virgins to come to the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all these beautiful girls into the harem at the citadel of Susa. Let them be placed under the care of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let beauty treatments be given to them. Then let the girl who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This advice appealed to the king, and he followed it. Okay, there's a Disney version of this, which is they go looking throughout all the towns and cities of the vast empire, and it's a beauty competition, and Esther wins it, and she's turned from an orphan, as we're going to see, into a princess. That's the Disney version. In fact, I've heard that preached, that you might have started out in a difficult situation, but with enough faith, God can raise you up to be a princess like Esther. Well, maybe that's a Disney version, but it's not a biblically faithful picture. Look, the king is upset because he's been upstaged by his wife, and so he's trying to find a replacement for his wife. And the way they do it is based on not really a beauty contest, but some form of people trafficking moment. These women didn't have any choice. They were going to be brought forward, they were going to be searched for, and then appointed, whether they liked it or not, as queens, as brides for the king. So this is a picture of exploitation and of abuse. Women didn't get to choose anything. Again, we're seeing patriarchy in its most horrible state, that he can have any woman that he wants in the world, and he can have them forced to have beauty treatments so that they appeal to his sensibilities. And it's a male attendant that proposes this, and it's a male king that thinks it's a great idea. This is a beginning of a pretty horrific story for a lot of women in the Medo-Persian Empire. Verse 5. Now, there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among those taken captive with Jehoiakim, king of Judah. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. So we're introduced now to the ethnic element of this. This great Medo-Persian Empire, led by the kind of powerful but somehow weak King Xerxes, includes Israel. They are the inheritors of the kingdoms that the Babylonian Empire had invaded. And amongst them is Mordecai. And Mordecai has a young niece that he has brought into his life. Now, you know I run a fostering and adoption charity, so my mind is attentive to this. But here is Hadassah, who gets rebranded because that's what happened in the ancient world. They get given other names. And so she's going to be Esther. And this story is of an orphan girl, genuine orphan, mother and father both dead. And so what do? Do you notice they didn't put her in an orphanage? Orphanages were not a biblical idea. That what happens is this is kinship care. Mordecai brings her into his family. That's the most natural and normal thing to happen to a child that has been orphaned, that another family member might step up to take them in. Orphanages were not a biblical intervention about how to care for vulnerable children. They're a later invention, I think, part of the industrialisation of childcare. That's a whole other story. There's a whole website about that, Homecoming Project. Have a look at that. I'll send you a link. But anyway, so interesting, Mordecai, we don't hear a lot about his wider family. There's no mention of a wife. Now, you can't argue from silence. You can't say that he definitely had a wife. You can't say he definitely didn't. It's possible that Mordecai was a single man who was looking after his young niece. There's evidence later on that makes me think that he might well have been a single man. But anyway, if I'm wrong on that, please let me know. But he's brought this young girl into his family because she's his niece, and he's raising her as his own. Friends, all around the world that's happening. There are amazing families that are stepping in to welcome their relatives into their household whenever that can happen. If mum and dad are incapable or have been deemed unfit by the courts or have died, this is the most normal way to do things. A friend of mine, Diane Louise Jordan, that's her story. She looks after her niece because her sister died. And so this young girl comes into the care of Mordecai, but then, because of this king's order, bad things begin to happen to Esther. When the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, many girls were brought to the citadel of Susa and put under the care of Haggai. Brought to the citadel of Susa. That doesn't sound like they've all kind of rocked up like it's the X Factor, hoping to catch the eye of a beautiful young prince. This sounds like a powerful despotic ruler ordering women around in his kingdom. Esther also was taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Haggai, who had been in charge of the harem. The girl pleased him and won his favour. Immediately he provided her with beauty treatments and special food. He assigned to her 7 maidens selected from the king's palace and moved her and her maids into the best place in the harem. Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Every day he walked to and fro near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. I'm pretty sure that the king doesn't want men hanging around near the harem. He's put a eunuch in charge of the harem because a eunuch was considered to be a safe man to be with all these women. And part of me thinks, if Mordecai had a wife, wouldn't he have sent her? She might have had better or easier access to young Esther. But again, arguing from silence, I wouldn't build a whole theology on that. But for me, it just, I don't know, it's evidence in my mind that Mordecai was likely to have been single. Before a girl's turn came to go into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatment prescribed for the women, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. And this is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given to her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go there, and in the morning return to another part of the harem to the care of Shashgaz. Okay, this looks like a sex industry, doesn't it? That the young girls prepared, made clean, purified, a year's worth of preparation. I mean, it's just overkill, isn't it? This king does things in a kind of bigger than life way. And so that we saw that with his crazy 6-month parade and a week long's worth of banqueting, and now a year's worth of beauty treatment. And these girls are brought into him. He has his way with them, and then he puts them away. That seems to be what's going on. It's pretty abysmal. And the young girl would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name. When the turn came for Esther, the girl Mordecai had adopted. Nice. See that little use of the word adopted? Not many uses of the word adopted in the Old Testament. Adoption seems to be more of a New Testament concept, but there it is. The daughter of his uncle, Abihail, to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the harem, suggested. And Esther won the favour of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Xerxes and the royal residence in the 10th month, the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Now, there's all sorts of undercurrents going on here, isn't there? So it's a little bit like Daniel winning favour, God's opening doors for his people, and yet they're in the middle of something horrific. Daniel was conscripted and frog marched from his home into Nebuchadnezzar's kind of university for brainwashing young men. Esther, a young woman, taken from her home, brought to the king, a year's worth of beauty treatment. She doesn't have a lot of power in this situation, but still God is somehow with her and God is opening doors for her. But she hasn't revealed her nationality. That's interesting. There's a fear already in the background that if the king were to know about her ethnicity, that would be a problem. And so it's kept secret. We're seeing this whole thing play out with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matters movement, that someone's ethnicity, someone's colour is something that is going to disadvantage them. There's going to be a structural problem that if they reveal who they are, they're going to be made worse off. And when it comes to colour, it's hard to hide, but people have that problem even when it comes to application forms and whether you can apply for a job without them seeing a picture of your face, because there's a fear that people will be treated differently because of their race or their ethnicity. And it was there even in this moment. Even already in oppressed people are scared to let them know. There was something about being Jewish that put people at an even worse disadvantage, and so it was kept secret. Now, verse 17, the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women, and she won his favour and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet. Of course, he loves to wine and dine. And Esther's banquet for all his nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberality. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because the king can have whoever he wants. He's got all these women visiting him overnight. You notice the word virgin doesn't necessarily mean someone who hasn't slept with someone. It could just mean a young woman. That's a fluidity in the term. I don't know. To all intents and purposes, it looks like he's had a sex industry going on. But somehow he wants to marry because he needs a replacement for Vashti. He needs another trophy wife that he can have at his beck and call, that when he wants to show off he can bring her out, and this new wife will be obedient. Maybe that's what he thought. And he wants people to forget the image they had of Vashti challenging his authority. And so there's a lot at play here. Personally, it's King Xerxes' own kind of desires and greed, and then it's his face and how he's going to save face after an incredibly humiliating moment. Verse 19. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, but Esther had kept secret her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do, for she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were hanged on a gallows. All this was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king. All right, the story is coming together now, isn't it? God has orchestrated this moment that that somehow Esther is winning the favour of the king, even though it's an oppressive and terrible system. God's kind of using it for a good purpose. He hasn't blown it up completely. He's redirecting it. Mordecai just happens to be at the gate when this conspiracy theory comes out to kill the king, and the report goes up. Esther looks good because she saved the king. Mordecai is honoured, and then the stuff written in the king's major journals, or the kind of annals of history for the Medo-Persian Empire, everything is being set up. And if you know the story, you know what's going on. But you might notice already that we haven't heard the word God yet. But we can see him like a director shaping the scene, making sure everything's perfectly lined up. We haven't heard the word God yet. That's going to be important later. Friends, in this series, I'm trying to think a little bit about how do you lead when you haven't got any power. It seems like Mordecai's got no power. Esther's got no power. She can't choose who she marries. She can't choose what she wears. She can't choose who she sleeps with. That's kind of up to this despotic empire. And yet, somehow, people are trying to live upright and godly lives. They're caring for the vulnerable, like Mordecai welcoming an orphan child into his home. Esther trying to live in peace with the people around her, and that's winning her favour. There are little things that we can be doing, whether we've got great power or not, whether you have the ear of Boris Johnson or Donald Trump, or whether you've got loads of money or no money. It doesn't matter. There's stuff that we can be doing to honour God, however bad our circumstances, whatever's going on in the world. And this little book talks about how the little acts of kindness and obedience and compassion spiral and ripple to cause huge impact. And so, friends, I guess for you and for me, the challenge today is, well, what are the kind acts that maybe no one will see, no one will notice, that we need to be doing, that set the stage for God to use us in ways maybe beyond our imagination or even beyond our knowing? Some things we do, that some good acts that we sow into the world with God's help, ends up having huge impact, and we never hear about it, but we hear about it as we look back. And this is why this story of Esther is so important, isn't it? We're going to look back later and see how all the different little pieces were fitting together. God was weaving a tapestry out of the different moments and acts of kindness in people's lives. I love this book of Esther. We're going to enjoy as we go through each part. God is setting the scene. There's going to be a big event that takes place in chapter 3. Join me tomorrow as we dig further into the story of Esther in FAQ. See you soon.